Bravo is finally an S tier hero, and I've been wanting to talk about him for so long. So let's talk about Bravo Showstopper and everything you need to know to pilot this deck at a top level. Today I'm going to be making an in-depth video where I talk about the history of Bravo, all of the mechanics of Bravo, things you should know about Bravo, the deck choices of Bravo. Probably one of the most in-depth hero guides I've ever made on this channel. Bravo has been my main since I started during Monarch, so like almost 2 years ago. I've been playing Bravo. I've played other Guardians. I liked Oldhim as well. I played Bravo, star of the show, but Guardian has always been my main hero, and Bravo Showstopper has been that hero as well. So I'm really excited to impart some of my knowledge and talk about everything you need to know about Bravo Showstopper here. He's currently one of the best decks in the meta. He, had the most heroes of any hero in the top 8 of the last calling. He put 3 Bravos into the top 8, so he had the best performance at the event. And he's just in a really great place right now. He uses, you can kind of see a combination of stuff here, mostly big, powerful attacks that are expensive, but have really nice on hit effects or on crush effects. Crush meaning it has to deal 4 or more damage. And then he uses the keyword dominate a lot, which is really powerful, making it so they can only block with 1 card from hand, and making it so you get some easy damage in and often guarantee your crush effects or your on hit effects. You can see we've got pretty expensive attacks, 5 cost, 6 cost, 7 cost, 7 cost coming in here. So some pretty expensive cards, but with all really powerful effects, getting rid of Go Again, making them discard 2 random cards, making it so they can't attack with anything really. So some pretty powerful effects here. Let's start by looking at Bravo and his kind of hero ability and what we're going to want to do with it. So the hero ability is actually not very strong in some ways. So you're paying 2 resources for the effect until end of turn. Your attack action cards with cost 3 or greater gain dominate. So all your attacks with cost 3 or greater gain dominate that turn, and then it has Go Again, so you can keep playing stuff after you use this ability. Now, 2 resources to give something dominate is not amazing. It's not the most efficient use of resources. You'd really like it to only cost 1. Like Dominate's worth maybe 1 resource in Flesh and Blood, and even then, you'd rather try to get it for free through other methods. Like if you look at Valda, who is another Guardian but is a young hero for the Blitz format, she gets it by having like 3 Seismic Surges, I think. So getting it for free is a lot more efficient. His hero ability is actually not strong in terms of by the numbers, but it's really good in practice because Dominate makes it so your opponent can't just block out your really big cards, and they're gonna get their on hits through, and it's going to get you an easy way to close out the game. That's also one of the main parts, is it makes closing the game a lot easier because you can just at the end dominate all your stuff. And then, if you're coming in with even just 8 dominate every turn, your opponent's eventually going to just take 5 damage every time because they can only block with the 1 card from hand, and you'll kill them that way. So by the math, it's not very good, but in practice, it ends up being quite a bit stronger than by the math would make you believe. His signature weapon is Anathos. This has been his most popular weapon for a long time, the main weapon he plays, and kind of what you build your deck around. You can see that it talks about cost 3 or greater in the text again, and his hero ability also cared about your cards being cost 3 or greater, so his deck has the theme where you want almost everything to have cost 3 or greater. This is a pretty good weapon already attacking on its own. It costs 3 resources to attack with it and attacks for 4. 1 card for 4, which is what this is, 1 card being the blue you pitch for 4 damage, is the perfect quote-unquote rate in Flesh and Blood. You want to try to get 4 damage or 4 block from every card that you're playing. That's kind of the goal. Often you're getting 3 from everything, but if you can get 4 from everything, that's kind of not always the peak, but it's usually the peak for most cards is 4. So already pretty solid on its own, better than almost every other weapon in the game. But it has a pretty nice effect where if you have 2 or more cards in your pitch zone with cost 3 or greater, it gains +2. So you can pitch, if you have 2 cards in your pitch zone, if you've had another way to pitch a card that also has cost 3 or greater, now it's 2 cards for 6. You'll notice that is a pretty big decrease in value. The first card is dealing 4 damage, and the second card is only dealing 2 extra damage. so the second card's doing pretty bad in terms of the rate, but it can still be useful if you're playing against a really slow deck where you have a bunch of extra cards and you can use this to really grind them out. 6 damage a turn is no joke, and they're going to eventually run out of cards to block with if they're just blocking. It's good if your opponent didn't do a ton of damage, so you were able to keep an extra card. It just makes it a little more flexible. Usually the better option is obviously to attack for 4, because 1 card for 4 is a lot better than 2 cards for 6. But it's really nice to have the flexibility there, and into some matchups, it is better to have that attack for 6. You might ask, how are we going to do that? Obviously, you can overpitch, so if you pitch a red or a yellow first, then you'll still need to keep pitching, so you can pitch a second card to get both cards into your pitch zone, and as long as they're both cost 3 or greater, you get that. But the other main way is through basically his signature chess piece. It's what Bravo has always played, which is tectonic plating. This chess piece is amazing. It has 2 block with battle worn, meaning you're going to always get that 3 extra health from it, blocking 2 and then 1, and it's going to stick around after it's used up all of its block value. So this is one of those OG Welcome to Wraith first set legendaries, meaning they were all really good and they all had battle worn and got really good effects. So all of these were amazing. This one has the effect of once per turn action, pay 1 resource to create a Seismic Surge Aura token with Go Again. And Seismic Surge Aura tokens are tokens that at the beginning of your next turn, they'll destroy themselves. And for every Seismic Surge you have, you discount your first Guardian attack by 1 resource. So it's basically like using that resource for later. You're paying the resource to get the Surge now, and next turn you'll get 1 resource discount on your first Guardian attack. Which, you don't really get any value from it. You're paying 1 resource this turn for a resource off next turn. There's no change in value, but it's nice for 2 reasons. One, obviously it's a way to pitch a second card for Anathos. So even if you have 2 blues and you wouldn't be able to overpitch, you can pitch 1 to make a surge and then pitch for Anathos. So you have 2 cards, you can always get 6 damage off on Anathos. The second reason is sometimes you just have an extra resource hanging around. You might have a card, for example, like Spinal Crush. It costs 5. So if you have 2 blues and you want to play this, you're just going to waste the resource there. But you can instead use that resource for tectonic plating, get that resource for next turn, and maybe then it'll be more valuable on your next turn and get you a discount that's actually useful. So it's not bad to have, and you're not really losing anything by playing this, because getting 3 block value from any equipment is always basically the best you can do, except for some really big outliers like Carrion Husk. But 3 is like already the best for an equipment most of the time in terms of blocking. Crater Fist is basically always the arm piece. You almost never use the effect here. It's way too expensive. You're paying 3 resources to destroy it and give your crush attacks +2 this turn. But you only can really play 1 crush attack a turn because they don't have Go Again. So you're paying 3 resources for 2 damage, which is really bad. But the main thing, you don't really care about that. You're just blocking it for 2 with it, and it has temper. So after you block for 2, it can block for 1. And then after you block for 1, it'll be destroyed. That's totally fine. Like I said, getting 3 extra health from any equipment piece is really, really good. So you are totally happy to do that. And Crater Fist is basically a must-have along with Tectonic Plating. Just these 2 alone give you 6 extra health blocking throughout the game, which is really, really helpful. So those are the 2 required equipment pieces. Iron Rot legs are currently what most people rock with as your leg piece. These are quite bad as far as equipment go, but they have never ever made a Guardian leg piece. So we're playing these really bad common generic Iron Rot legs. They literally just block 1 and then destroy themselves. They're not good, but they're basically the best Guardian has. You could do like some other funny stuff like Snapdragon Scalers or Ironhide legs or Mage Master boots. There's stuff you could mess around with, but these are the most consistent because you're always going to get that at least 1 value from them. But I think Guardian players have been hoping since the game came out, basically. So like 2 to 3 years now, for a Guardian leg piece. So one day there will be hopefully a really good Guardian leg piece, and then you won't have to play these Iron Rot legs anymore. But for now, spend $25 and get a really cool altar, and you'll have cool leg pieces at least. But we have Crown of Providence as the headpiece. This one's only blocking 2, which is still pretty good value from an equipment, but the effect is actually pretty important, being able to put a card from your hand or arsenal on the bottom of your deck and draw a card. Sometimes Bravo can have a little bit of a clunky hand or a clunky arsenal. If you're too short on resources, so you don't have enough blues, or you have too many resources, so you have all blues, or maybe you unfortunately had to arsenal a card that you really didn't want to, so you arsenal like a random garbage blue that you don't want in there. This can get rid of it. So the effect usually comes up at least once a game where you're actually going to want to try to use the sync effect, and that's pretty helpful. So this card is definitely the best headpiece for Bravo. He played Arcanite Skullcap for a long time, and obviously that one can get potentially one more block value. But I think the effect of this card is much more valuable than the one extra health from Arcanite Skullcap. So that's or I should say it was the standard loadout for Bravo. We'll go into what Bravo has evolved into, but right now we're kind of looking at older deck lists and just talking about the basics of Bravo and what each thing does. Now, this is actually my deck that I played at Pro Tour Baltimore earlier this year. Maybe, I don't know how long ago that was, maybe 6 months ago or a little less than that. And I did pretty good with it. I went 5-3, won 5 games, lost 3 games. I think I probably could have done a little better with playing a little different, maybe keeping my mental a bit stronger. But overall, I was pretty happy with the performance. Bravo was not meant to be a good deck. People didn't think he was a good deck at the time. He was maybe B tier at the time, and I would probably agree with that. He was probably a B tier hero at the time. Now he's considered like the second best deck in the game. He's gotten a lot of buffs since then in the last 6 months, and the meta has changed a lot. So he's much better now than when I played him at Baltimore, and I would be so happy to lock him in right now for any of these events. But let's kind of look at the breakdown of an average Bravo deck. So usually you're going to play the clean 60 cards, obviously. You can say I only have 58 here, but I was picking 2 sideboard cards usually to throw in. You have the 60 clean cards, and then the standard for the longest time was 39 blues and then 21 reds. That was kind of the standard. It gave you the stats you wanted to have. You want like 2.5 blues per hand. You want like 2 blues sometimes, 3 blues the other time. And you can see with 39 blues, we had like 30% chance for 2 blues, a little higher, like 40% chance for 3 blues. You really never want to draw 0 blues. Your hand's basically useless with 0 blues because you can't even Anathos then. You're just like trying to block with all 4 cards or block with 3 cards and then Arsenal 1. You're not going to do anything on a hand with 4 reds. So you'd like at least 1 blue per hand, but usually you'd like at least 2 blues. So trying to hit that 2 blue per hand minimum just based on the cost of our cards. Most of our cards cost 4, 7, 5, and we can always use 2 blues because of Anathos to at least get 6 value out of them. So 2 blue minimum is kind of the rule of thumb for Bravo. So 39 blues is a pretty safe number to be at, 21 reds. A lot of the cards here you're going to see in almost all Bravo decks. You want everything to be in your blues is all of your 6 power cards you're going to play. That's for 3 main reasons. One is that they're poppers, so against any illusionist, these will pop any of their phantasm cards. So that's already a big win. You get to play that, and if you're playing all of your 6 power cards at blue, you are going to have a pretty good matchup into Dromai right off the bat. It's one of Bravo's easier matchups. If you know it well, some Dromais might tell you differently. If they build their deck a certain way, it could be harder. But generally, Bravos does pretty well into Dromai because they can just never get an attack in with Phantasm. It's always going to get popped. So that is a big reason. The second is you want your red Zealous Beltings to always be online. So these are one of your stronger sideboard cards. It's one of Bravo's only ways to have go again with an attack. So this is a 2 cost, 5 power. And it says while there is a card in your pitch zone with power greater than this card's base power, it has go again. So you need to have pitched a card with power 6 or greater. So to be able to get this into a 2 for 5 go again, you need to pitch a 6 power card, meaning we're playing all of them we can at blue. And then the third reason is basically they're just the strongest blue. Like if you have to attack with a blue, 6 isn't great, obviously, because at that point it's better just to Anathos. But if it's at least 7, now you're getting a little more value from Anathos, or than playing Anathos. So that's where the blues basically come in. You can see most of our blues are just here to be pitched or blocked with. 90% of the time, you're either pitching your blue or you're blocking with it. You almost never play your blues. Like they're not really here to be played with. they're pretty weak compared to playing your reds, obviously, but there is some nice flexibility for some of these in the late game, especially being able to win the game just by playing them out because they're bigger. So, for example, we've got Macho Grande. This is a pretty expensive blue. It costs 7, but it has 8 power and dominate, right? So at the end of the game, you can just kill your opponent with this if they don't have enough to block with it and they're at low enough health. Obviously, your hero ability can also give dominate. So Cranial Crush, not an amazing effect. I mean, it's a decent crush effect if it deals 4 or more damage, which is what crush means. They can't draw cards, so some heroes that applies to and is really impactful, and some it does absolutely nothing. But once again, 8 power is really high on a blue. Guardians have the biggest power blues in the entire game, so giving this dominate for 8 resources is really expensive, but in the late game it can be exactly what you need to win. So we're playing all of our 6 power or higher blues. Until they print so many you can't do that, which I don't think is going to happen. You're always just going to do that in Bravo. It's the safest option. And then let's talk about kind of the other notable blues. So that kind of covers most of them. Honestly, you're almost never going to play any of these, especially if they're at 6 power. You're actually wasting a card when you play it. Like pitching it to Anathos is better because it makes you fatigue less. So you almost never want to resolve your blues. The only time you should really be resolving your blues is if giving them dominate will win you the game. That's like basically it. Like don't attack with your blues ever unless doing so is going to win you the game, basically. There's like a few exceptions, like the 8 powers are pretty good, and if you have 3 cards for some reason, like you didn't need those cards at all, your opponent just passed, and you only can attack with that, that's totally fine. But generally speaking, it's just better to block with them than to actually play them out. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb, especially for the attacks. We're going to kind of go over the few exceptions. So the strongest blues, that covers almost all the blues, but the strongest blues for actually being played are these 2 Majestics here. We have Tear Asunder, which is a really strong card. It costs 3, and it says your next Guardian attack this turn has +1 power, dominate, and if this hits a hero, they discard 2 cards with Go Again. So really strong effect, giving an attack +1 power and dominate, and the on hit is the most important part. If this hits a hero, they discard 2 cards. +1 and dominate isn't really worth it because +1 is whatever, and dominate is what your hero ability already does. So it would just be better to pitch a blue than to use 2 whole cards just to give something +1 and dominate. It's pretty bad there, but the effect is amazing. Obviously, if it hits, they discard 2 cards. That's insane. I mean, making your opponent discard cards is always good, and discarding 2 is great. But the actual big benefit here is that it only says Guardian attack. It doesn't say attack action. So it actually applies to your weapon. So playing this out and then pitching another blue for your Anathos, you'll have already pitched a 3-cost blue to play the Tear Asunder, so you have 1, and you pitch the second one for Anathos. So using 3 blues, you can attack for 7 dominate with Anathos and threaten the discard on hit. So it's the strongest way to power up your weapon. You're most often going to use it on Anathos because it's pretty expensive to do it with an attack. Usually you need like 5 cards to use it with an attack action, and you only need 3 cards to do it with Anathos. So really good. Obviously, it's also a 3-cost blue that blocks 3, so that's kind of almost all of his blues. There's only 2 blues here that we're going to talk about that aren't block 3s. First is Rouse the Ancients. It is a very powerful card to play, especially in matchups where you're the aggressor. If you're the person who's defending, this card's not great. You play it because it's so good in the other matchups, but it's usually just going to be pitched or unfortunately blocked with for 2 against aggro decks. But if you're the aggressor, so if you're in the mirror match, into Dash, if they're on the item game plan, into Dromai, this card's a phenomenal card. For 3 resources, it comes in for 0, but not actually. It says as an additional cost to play it, you can reveal any number of attack action cards from your hand with 13 or more total power. So you can reveal a 6 and a 7 power, 2 cards, and then if you do that, this has +7 power and Go Again. So it's a 7 power Go Again for 3 resources if you reveal 13 or total power from your hand, which is really, really good. And because once, just like Tear Asunder, when you pitch a blue to play this, you already have a 3 cost in your pitch zone. You can then pitch a second blue to Anathos. So the best line with Rouse the Ancients is to have Rouse, a second blue, another blue that's going to be revealed and then pitched for Anathos, and then a red card to Arsenal. Because the red card is going to be wasted otherwise, because if you're pitching for Rouse, playing Rouse, and then pitching another card for Anathos, there's nothing you're doing with the other revealed card. So the best option with that is to Arsenal it. So if I have any blue and then any other blue that's 6 power, so if I have a Crippling Crush in hand, I have a blue Choke Slam, and then I have a Stamp Authority, I can pitch the Stamp Authority to play Rouse. I can reveal blue Choke Slam and Crippling, and then I can pitch the Choke Slam to Anathos for 6, and then I can Arsenal the Crippling Crush. So I just used 3 cards, the Rouse and the 2 blues, to attack for 13, which is really, really good off of 3 cards. You're getting more than 4 damage per card then, right? That 13 is more than 4 damage per card. Plus, you get to Arsenal a good red card. If you have 2 blue cards revealed, it's a little bit weaker because then you have to Arsenal a blue card, or maybe you're just going to pitch that blue card to Tectonic Plating. So it's not as good if you have to reveal a blue card there, but the best line that I explained is really good. Then your other card that doesn't technically block 2 is Unmovable. This is a 3-cost defense reaction, which is nice, and it's really flexible. It doesn't block efficiently, because if you're pitching 3 and then blocking with this from hand, you're actually blocking with 2 cards for 5, which is worse than just blocking with 2 3 blocks. If it's from Arsenal, then you're blocking with 2 cards for 6, which is pretty nice. Then you're getting the full value, but you're saving a card, so it actually stops fatigue. Because if you're blocking with 2 cards for 6 from hand, then you're losing both of those. But if you're blocking with this for 6 and then pitching the other card, you get to keep that one in your deck. So that can stop the fatigue matchup a little. But sometimes if your opponent just attacks with a 5 power card, you are probably going to block with 2 3 blocks anyways. And so this is also a way to beat fatigue by doing this. So it's particularly useful nowadays into decks like Lexi in particular. Lexi is the best deck in the game right now, and she has a lot of arrows that attack for 5. And often Bravo is trying to fatigue her, meaning run her out of all of her cards. And so this lets you block with just 1 card for 5, keeping the other card in your deck on her 5 power arrows. So that's really the big thing from Unmovable. It also doubles as a defense reaction. So we've gone through all the blues. We're 22 minutes in right now, so it's definitely going to be a long video because I'm not even sure if I'm halfway through yet. But let's go through all of the reds here. The biggest and most powerful red cards for Bravo are Crippling Crush, which is his specialization. This card is just insane. It costs 7, so very expensive. It's going to take at least 3 cards most of the time. It attacks for 11, though, which is a huge number. And if it crushes, meaning once again dealing 4 or more damage, they discard 2 random cards. So they don't even get to pick the cards. They're just losing 2 full cards from their hand. This card's amazing. And because it costs 7, you're pitching 3 blues, and you'll usually have 2 floating, which means you can give it Dominate with that 2 floating using your hero ability, right? So that's a really powerful combination. 11 Dominate, most decks are not going to be able to block all of it, and they're often not even going to be able to block 8 damage because they have to block 8, obviously, to not take 4. So they're often going to just take this. So this is really good into aggro decks in particular, obviously, but it's just good into everyone. This card's just amazing. 7 or 11 damage is a lot. 7 is also a nice number because you can play it off of a Seismic Surge, and what playing it off of a Seismic Surge means is if you have a Seismic Surge, this is getting discounted by 1, and now it only costs 6, which means you can play it off of exactly 2 blues. So 1 whole less card you need to pitch, which is particularly helpful into aggro decks. Against aggro decks, usually it's most important to have your health high and be blocking a lot, and keeping a whole extra card for Dominate is often not worth it. It might not be possible. If you can do it, that's great, but that means you're taking at least 3 extra damage usually to keep that extra card, and sometimes that's just not worth it to get Dominate just by keeping a whole extra card, and so you'd rather block with that. Obviously, that's not always possible if you have to pay the full 7, but if you have that Seismic Surge, it's often better against aggro decks in particular to block for 3 with that extra card, save some life, and then just attack without Dominate. Even without Dominate, they have to block with 3 cards to not get the crush effect active, right? They have to block with at least 2 3 blocks and a 2 block to not get crushed. And if they do that, they're only going to have 1 card left in their hand anyways. And what that often means is they're only going to threaten maybe 4 damage with that last card. And then you can play a full dominated crippling crush the turn after, right? That's like what we call like chaining crush cards. Because the first one takes so many cards from their hand, it just gets worse and worse from them from there. That's the goal, at least. The other really powerful red card here is Spinal Crush. This one does a little less damage. It does 9 damage, but it costs 2 less as well. It costs 5. And if this crushes, it just removes all go again from everything on their turn. Their equipment loses go again, so if they have tech plating, they can't activate it because once they activate it, their turn ends. Their cards lose go again. Everything loses go again. So they only get one action on their turn. They get to play one thing, they get to do one thing, and then their turn's over. Unless they have instants, but obviously that's what an instant is. It doesn't use up any actions. But they only get one action on their turn. This is an amazing card, obviously, especially into aggro decks. You might be seeing a theme here, but Guardian is really good into aggro decks. But Spinal Crush is just an amazing red, and it's always going to demand at least 2 cards from an aggro deck, even without Dominate. This card is saying, hey, you have to give me 2 cards, you have to block 6, and then take 3 damage, and you only get to keep 2 cards from your hand. And if you can, once again, have a Seismic Surge here, this only costs 4, so then you can pitch 2 blues and use 2 resources to give it Dominate. And then they have to have a defense reaction or use equipment to stop the crush there. The other powerful red card we're playing here is Chokeslam. This is a nice 4 resources for 8. Usually you can see a trend here. The resources are going to make it so we can either pitch exactly to give it Dominate or pitch exactly with a Surge to play it. So in this scenario, you can pitch 2 blues to use hero ability and attack with this for 8 Dominate. Or if you have a Surge, you can pitch exactly 1 blue to play this. So both scenarios are really good. That's just really powerful how you can make that work. That's why most of the cards don't cost an even amount by themselves. It's not like 3 cost, because 3 cost isn't really efficient with a Surge, and it's not efficient to give it Dominate. So the like kind of uneven costs actually end up being the best for Bravo. But this card has a really nice crush effect, making it so their attack actions can't gain power. Against some decks, this is totally useless if they aren't a deck that gains power. Like, for example, in the mirror match, Bravo almost never gains power on his attacks. They're already so big, he doesn't need it. But into some decks, for example, Rune Blades often buff their cards with cards like Nimblism, Channel Mount Heroic, Shrill of the Skull Form. Rune Blades almost buff all of their attacks. And this is going to make it so none of those attacks can have buffed power that turn. So into some decks, this is useless, but into some decks, it's one of your best cards. And 4 for 8 is still a really great rate. Our only non-Guardian attack here that's red is Command and Conquer. This card's kind of too good not to play. It's always a 3-block when you need it. Unfortunately, you cannot give this Dominate with your hero ability because it's not a 3 cost and it has to be 3 or greater for your hero ability. But it is nice that it costs 2 because you can pitch a blue to make a Surge and then play this. So you still get value out of that extra resource. Once again, the power of tectonic plating. And it just, once again, it demands 2 cards. Bravo is usually going to ask every deck to give him 2 cards every turn minimum. This says if you don't give me 2 cards, if you don't block with 2 3-blocks here, you're going to lose your arsenal. Obviously, if they don't have an arsenal, this is a lot worse. You're going to either want to block with it or arsenal it for later. So, try to avoid playing this if they don't have an arsenal. It's pretty bad if they don't. But if they do have an arsenal, they're going to usually want to give you 2 cards to not lose it. If they lose their arsenal, you're getting an extra, average cards are worth about 3 value in Flesh and Blood. So you're getting, 3 extra value there by destroying their arsenal, meaning this is kind of like a 2 for 9, which is just way too good. So Command and Conquer, it's long been probably the best Majestic in Flesh and Blood, and it still is. So Command and Conquer is amazing. Really powerful card to have here. It's also obviously great in combination with Pummel. Pummel costs 2, and if you target an attack action card with cost 2 or greater, it gains +4, and if it hits, they discard a card. This is amazing. It applies to basically all your attacks. You don't have anything with cost 2 or less, and it gives them a discard on hit. It also gives it exactly +4, so even if they block the full card, +4 means it'll still get its crush effect off if it has one. And with Command and Conquer, they can't play defense reactions. So if you get any damage over with Pummel, they can't stop it with a new card. So really powerful there. I think the last reds in the main deck to go over here are Fate Foreseen and Sink Below. These The effect is fine, like, opting one or sinking a card is both nice, but really it's just the fact that they are getting 4 value from one card on the defensive. I spoke earlier about how in Flesh and Blood, 4 value is your ideal value from one card. Obviously, the more you can get, the better, but your goal is really to get at least 4 value from every card. And these cards are basically always going to get that in the idea, as long as you're blocking something with 4 power or more. So pretty good here. They fill out kind of the defensive portion of the deck. And that's the main deck here. Taking just a quick look at the sideboard, and then I'll move on to the current Bravo list and what's changed. This is what my sideboard was back in Baltimore. We had stuff that we don't really use anymore, like Van Brace. This was just for Oldham, and now he's Living Legend. Remembrance isn't as useful now either, because that was also for Oldham. Unmovables are a great Bravo sideboard card, especially in the mirror match now. They just block for a ton of value. This is 2 cards for 8 if it's from Arsenal, so 4 value per card. They're good against decks that have really big attacks, and they cost 3, so you can pitch it to give Anathos a buff. We're just playing the reds here along with the blues. Smashing Good Time is a nice card just for the dash matchup. This can buff up your attacks and then destroy Dash's items if they hit. That's always super helpful because dash can be a hard matchup. Zealous Beltings are probably our strongest sideboard card. These are pretty bad into aggro because you have to keep extra cards to play them, and they only block 2. But they're pretty amazing into anything that's not aggro. Because if it's not an aggro deck, you can pitch a blue to play this, and then pitch another blue to Anathos. That's 11 value from 3 cards, so slightly underrate because you're getting 4 value from 2 of those cards and then 3 from the last one. But you'll have 1 floating to make a surge, which technically recycles 1 of those points of value. So pretty good combination, but way too many cards into aggro decks. It doesn't have any on hit or anything. It doesn't threaten any cards from their hand. So it's pretty bad to get into aggro. Aggro, you really want to take cards from their hand every turn. And the only way to take cards from aggro's hand, which when I say take cards from their hand, I mean like make them block, because the more aggro decks are blocking, the less damage they're doing. The only way to take cards from their hand is on hits, right? Command and Conquer, Crippling Crush, Spinal Crush, Pummel. You need to force them to block, and this is just straight damage. There's no on hit, so not good enough into aggro, but into everything that's not aggro, it's really, really good, and it's worth playing it. Usually you're going to play it over the defense reactions because those aren't useful into other stuff that's not aggro anyways. They're mostly to block aggro decks. So Zealous Belting is like always going to be 3 reds. Until they print something much better, Bravo is always going to have at least the 3 reds. And then I have a yellow in here, mostly for the Dromai matchup. 4 damage kills Mirror Guy, which is the biggest dragon for us, or the biggest problem with dragon. Some other small stuff. Blessing of Deliverance is a nice card that heals you. This was good into Oldham in specific. Crush the Weak is good if Ninja is ever a problem. And then to a lesser extent, Runeblade. It's a nice red crush that makes it so they can't play attack actions with the real S base power. The only problem is, I spoke earlier about how even pitch cards aren't the most efficient with Bravo. So 3 for 7, it's a little too easy for them to block this out. But then we've got Pulverize. This is Bravo's biggest attack. It attacks for 14, but it costs 10, so it's always going to at least take 4 cards, this plus 3 pitch, and that's if you have a Seismic Surge. It'll take full 5 cards if you have 3 blues or 3 blues and a red to play this. So it's very, very expensive, but it's particularly good into slow matchups where you can keep a bunch of cards. They're not threatening a lot of damage. In the mirror match, it's really good because it has a nice on hit of if it hits, their first attack during their next turn has -4. So some decks -4 is going to be useless because if against a ninja, they can just Kodachi for 1, and then it uses up the whole on hit. But in the mirror, obviously, -4 is very good. So this is mostly a mirror card, but it's useful in other matchups. But this was my Baltimore deck. I went over most of the basics of Bravo there. If you've listened to it up to this point, you'll be able to play Bravo at a pretty good level just by understanding the deck. This was the most recent Bravo using this list before Dusk Till Dawn came out. So it's not the exact list, but you can see it's pretty similar to what my list was at Baltimore. This was getting 3rd place at the Battle Hardened Charlotte just a few months ago before Dusk Till Dawn came out. So pretty similar list, but let's look at what has changed. So this is my current list. If you follow my Patreon, you'll see this constantly get updated. I probably tweak this deck every week, but it's pretty similar to the list that Pablo Pintor, one of the best 3 players in the whole world probably, took to a second place finish at the Calling Birmingham. So once again, a major event. Callings have 500-600 people, and he got second place there with Bravo. And you might notice that we have actually kind of switched up weapons, and that's the biggest change to the loadout here. We have switched from not always using Anathos now. Now we are using Titan's Fist a lot. This card can't do up to 6 damage, but it'll usually do the same thing as Anathos, which is pitch 3 to attack for 4. Because if you have a card with cost 3 or greater in your pitch zone, it has +1, which is basically always. So it'll attack for 4, which is basically the same thing Anathos is doing anyways. So you get to play a shield with it though, because this is only a one-handed weapon. So you get to play this Steel Braid Buckler, which is basically just 3 extra free health. It blocks for 2, has temper, so after it blocks for 2, it'll block for 1, and then get destroyed. So you don't lose too much, especially the main thing is into aggro decks, because into aggro decks, you really should never attack with Anathos for 6 anyways. You probably should have blocked with that second card. So if you're not going to want to attack with Anathos for 6 anyways, might as well get 3 free health and just attack for 4. So that's the biggest change. 3 extra health into aggro can be the difference in a matchup. If you were playing an aggro deck with Anathos and you die, and you would have lived at 1 or 2 if you had the shield, you might have won that if you had the shield. So it can be a huge difference in aggro matchups. They're usually down to the wire. They're at 1 or 2 health, you're at 1 or 2 health, and this extra 3 health from the shield can be a massive difference. Flesh and Blood is really a by the increments game. Every single 1 point of health matters. So 3 extra health is a whole extra card. Blocking cards block for 3. So 3 health is basically an entire extra card. You still play Anathos because into slow decks, you want to be able to attack for 6. In the mirror match, for example, if you brought Titan's Fist and they brought Anathos, you would lose. The mirror match is a very slow matchup where you're just basically attacking with Anathos back and forth. If you try to attack with your big attacks too much, it's too easy. Bravo's too good at blocking, and you'll probably deck your opponent. It's a very slow 50-minute Anathos slog. So you still need Anathos for some matchups, but generally into most of the decks, especially the aggro decks, Titan's Fist with Steel Braid Buckler has ended up being better. The rest of the loadout is basically the same. The other big card from Dusk Till Dawn is Starstruck. This card is maybe the best Bravo card in the game. It's at least one of them, and that's a huge power boost. It's another specialization. It's very similar to Crippling Crush. It costs the same. It attacks for 1 less, so only 10 instead of 11, but it actually pitches for 1 more. It's a yellow. This card's pretty OP. Its crush effect is when this deals 4 more damage to a hero, so same crush, the only attacks they can play or activate, or activate here is referring to weapons, the only attacks they can play or activate during their next turn are attacks with base power greater than the damage dealt this way, meaning the damage Starstruck dealt. So if it deals 4, which will trigger the crush, they can only play cards with base power greater than 4. So if they're an aggro deck that's mostly attacking with 3 or 4 power cards, they just cannot play anything. If this hits for 4 damage, they can only play or attack with a weapon or play attacks with 5 or greater power. So pretty huge. If it's doing 4, often against a lot of decks, like with smaller attacks like Ninja or Runeblade or even Rangers, they can't play anything on their turn. Absolutely no cards. They don't have anything with enough power. So it's really, really, really good effect. It's basically a second Crippling Crush in your deck, and it's just as strong as Crippling Crush and Spinal Crush. Very, very, very powerful. Obviously, into some decks, like if you think about the mirror match, that's pretty useless because all you have to do is block 2, and then it's only dealing 8, and a lot of your stuff has more than 8 power. If they hit you, even if this whole thing hits you for 10, I can still Crippling Crush because it has more than 10 power. So in the mirror match, maybe not as good. But into aggro decks in particular, this might just end their entire turn. The nice thing, though, is this card actually always is good because it has a second effect, Unity. When this defends together with a card from hand, so blocking with 2 cards at once, this and another card, you create a Seismic Surge token under any number of heroes' control, which is probably just going to be you. You're not going to make your opponent a Seismic Surge usually. But that means against decks where the first effect doesn't matter, you can't really block well, or they don't have small attacks. I mean, if they're a big attack deck like the mirror match, you can block with it, because if they're attacking for 6, right, a big attack. If they're a deck that's attacking for 6, the first effect might not be helpful. You can block with 6 for 2 cards, and you get a free Seismic Surge. So this card's always helpful. With the Seismic Surge, that's huge. You're getting a free Seismic Surge just by blocking with it. Now it's getting 4 value, blocking for 3 plus 1 extra resource from the Seismic Surge. So it's already as good as a Sink Below or a Fate Foreseen blocking. And then you can block, let's say you have a Crippling Crush in your arsenal. You block with Starstruck plus any 3 block, so you block for 6, and you get a Seismic Surge. Then if your other 2 cards are blues, you can now play Crippling Crush off of the Seismic Surge and 2 cards. Like, it's just amazing. I can't even explain how good Starstruck is. It's the only really new card from Dusk Till Dawn we care about, but it's probably the best card Bravo's ever gotten since the first set, Welcome to Wraith, when he got all of his cards, really. So this card's just a phenomenal card, and it's been a huge power boost to Bravo. It's also a yellow, so sometimes you need 2 resources instead of a red, which would only give you 1. If you want to play Spinal Crush and you only drew a blue in Starstruck, you can still play Spinal Crush for 5. But if you drew a red and a blue, you can no longer play Spinal Crush. So being a yellow is not anything to laugh at either, especially with a deck like Bravo that uses so many cards. The other red changes, we're playing more of the Fate Foreseens now. I actually cut all of the Pummels from my deck. I don't love the rate for Pummel. I haven't loved Pummel for a long time. It's a really strong card. I think playing a few of them is fine. But personally, I want it to be a little more defensive, and Pummel only blocks 2, and it's technically only dealing 4 damage with 2 cards. You have to use the 2 resources for it and itself, so 4 for 2 is pretty bad. If they're discarding a card, obviously it's a lot better, but if they block it and it doesn't make them discard a card, it's pretty rough. So I don't love Pummel. I cut it, and I'm playing all 3 Fate Foreseens now. I'm also cutting 3 blues. There's 2 reasons I cut 3 blues. 3 reasons I cut 3 blues. The first is that with Titan's Fist, we don't need 2 blues as often. If we only have 1 blue, we can still attack for 4. Obviously, Anathos is the same, but Anathos was able to use 2 blues whenever you drew that. Titan's Fist really can't use 2 blues. I mean, you can still make a surge, but it's pretty wasted because the second blue is just making a surge, not any extra value. So Titan's Fist means the second blue is a lot less useful. We also have 3 yellows now. You notice before it was 39 blues and 21 reds, but now we are playing 3 yellows, so that's slightly, it's in between a blue and a red. So these are kind of our half blues. So if you count Starstruck as like a half blue, we're playing 39 blues still, just some of them are not as good as a blue. And then the third reason is I'm playing Enlightened Strike now. And this card does not need a blue. You can bottom any card. It says as an additional cost to play it, you can choose a card from your hand and put it on the bottom of your deck. Any card, right? So if you have just 2 reds, meaning the Enlightened Strike and any other red, you can still play this out. Usually you're going to pick the middle mode, which means it gains +2. So 2 cards for 7 is pretty good. You're getting 4 value from one card and 3 from the other. That's totally fine. So this is a way to do that pretty well. And then the other mode you're going to choose a lot is Go Again. If you have 3 cards, if you have a blue as well, you can bottom the card and get Go Again to come in for 5 Go Again, and then you can pitch your blue for Titan's Fist here. That's 9 value, 9 power from 3 cards, which is 3 from each card. That's not bad either. Totally fine to get 3 from each card. Obviously, you'd like to get a little more, but if your opponent lets you keep the cards, lets you keep in this scenario, meaning they didn't attack for a lot of damage, you're still able to get some pretty good damage back in. So I like the Enlightened Strike. Go Again is pretty rare in Bravo in terms of attacks. Bravo almost always only attacks with 1 card per turn. The only way you can get around that is Enlightened Strike, the Rouse the Ancients here, and then the Zealous Beltings. So you only have 9 cards that let you attack with multiple attacks a turn. There are a few other cards that are changed here. That's kind of all of the changes for the reds. The blues, we have a few changes with. We're playing Fyendal's Fighting Spirit. This is a 3-cost blue that only blocks 2, which isn't amazing, and it's not 6 power, which isn't great either. But the main power comes from its effect. So if you block with it, so it says when you attack or defend, mostly we care about defending here. When you defend with it, if you have less life than your opponent, you gain a life. So you're getting 3 value from it still, so 2 block plus a life, so it's still blocking for 3. But this is particularly good when your opponent is attacking for either 2 or attacking for 5. So when you're still blocking it perfectly with a 3 block plus this, or if they're attacking for 2, and you get that life value, it's better than a 3 block in that scenario, right? So if they're attacking for 5, and you block with 2 3 blocks, you block with 2 Macho Grandes, sure, you blocked all 5 with your 2 cards. But if you blocked with a Fighting Spirit and a Macho Grande, you still blocked exactly the same amount because 5 or 6 doesn't matter if they're only attacking for 5, but you potentially gain a life here. So now you've gotten 1 free life where otherwise you wouldn't have. So it ends up being pretty useful, especially because Lexi is the most popular deck right now, and she has a ton of 5-power attacks. So pretty often you're going to get value from it. But I could see this being relevant for a long time in Bravo. Rosetta Thorn is a really popular weapon for Rune Blades. It attacks for 2 damage and 2 arcane. So this can block almost all of that just by blocking with this, because it'll block the 2 physical and it'll gain you a life, kind of preventing one of that 2 arcane damage. So it's even good into Rosetta Thorn. This is a pretty useful card, and I'm kind of mad at myself I didn't see it earlier, but it's very good. We're up 1 more in movable, up from 2 to 3. This card's just pretty useful. It's another way to block 5. That's pretty efficient into Lexi. And then we've got Warmonger's Diplomacy. This is our only blue that doesn't cost 3, but this is just such a powerful blue from Dusk Till Dawn. It's a blue that 3 blocks, which is once again what we want basically all of our blues to do, but it has a pretty powerful on-play effect. It basically makes it so you and your opponent both choose either War or Peace. If it's War, you can only activate weapon attacks or attack actions. If it's Peace, you can only activate or play non-weapon, non-attack actions. You're always going to choose War, so you can play a big attack or attack with your weapon still. You cannot activate Tectonic Plating or your hero ability, because those are not attacks. So you have to skip your Tectonic Plating or hero ability, which is fine. You still have your big attack. But your opponent also has to choose this, and it's really, really good into certain decks. So for example, Rune Blades always want to play 1 non-attack and 1 attack per turn. Every turn, they want to do that every turn. And this makes it so they can't do that at all. They have to pick either attack or non-attack. It's also pretty decent into Lexi and Azalea, the Rangers. They use a lot of non-attacks to buff their cards, and they can't do those anymore. So particularly into Ranger and Runeblade, this card is quite good, and it's worth having because you can play it on the first turn of the game. It doesn't have Go Again, so it's not always the best play, but even into decks where it's useless, it still blocks for 3 and pitches for 3. So it's a really powerful card. They're a little expensive right now. I think they're like 45 or 50 a piece. So if you don't have it, it's totally fine. You can play. I actually switched them out for his old specialization, Showtime. This card was basically always bad to play, except for the first turn of the game. It's just too slow. It's only really good if you're going first, but it's totally fine. So if you need to play Showtimes instead, they're like 50 cents versus $50 a card. So maybe you can build up for the Warmongers, but it's a generic, so you're going to want probably 3 of them eventually, because most decks are going to play this card now. It's really, really good. And that's the main board now. The sideboard, Sigil of Solace has become pretty popular. This card's good, particularly into Icelander, who does a lot of arcane damage, and this will prevent gaining 3 life is preventing some future arcane damage. It's really good into Icelander. She's probably Bravo's worst matchup that's popular. He might have some matchups that are technically worse than Icelander, but she's pretty hard for him to beat, and she's very popular. So she's this decker most fearing across the table. We're also playing 2 Hack to Reality. This card's pretty interesting. It's from Dusk Till Dawn. It's very weird. It costs 1. It gives your next attack this turn +2. So any attack, it even works on your weapon. It gives it +2. And then it says the next time you hit a hero this turn, so anything hits a hero, your weapon and attack action, you destroy a non-token aura they own with costs less than or equal to the damage dealt this way. So this works on Frost Hexes, because even though they put them under your control, they still own them. and it also works on Insidious Chills. So two really powerful auras that Icelander cares about. The hard part about this is that you have to deal 3 damage to do that, right? It only destroys something that has cost less than or equal to the damage. So you have to hit them for at least 3. And so if you can't give it Dominate, this is going to be pretty hard because they're just going to block with a bunch of cards. But to be fair, that's not the worst thing in the world. If your opponent is giving you 3 or 4 cards to block you out, you kind of win the tempo there. So either way, it's pretty decent. Worst case scenario, you pitch to make a Surge, play this, and then Anathos, and you get to attack for 8 with a pretty good on hit. So they have to give you 3 cards there at least, or 2 cards in an equipment. It's not bad, but I would have loved to just say if it hits instead of cost less. But I think it's pretty good. I'm happy with it so far, and maybe it's not worth it, but I like it, and I think it's not very popular right now. You'll see that it's not anywhere in Pablo Pintor's list, so you might surprise some Icelanders with it. We're playing 2 Null Rune. It's the best number versus Icelander. You're just going to play the boots into Runeblade in most Arcane decks because the headpiece isn't worth it. You only need the 1 Null Rune for the Rune Chance, and your Iron Route legs are obviously your worst equipment piece, but you'll want both of them into the Wizards, and your head is your second worst blocking piece. You're also going to play Anathos into Wizards, obviously. They're not dealing much physical damage at all, so the shield is a little useless. And so the 2 Arcane Barrier is nice. The main usefulness with it is if they have 2 of their tax effects. So Icelander has a lot of stuff that makes you pay 2 resources. So if they have 2 of those, you have to pay 4 resources. You'll pitch 2 blues to do that, and you'll have 2 floating to pay for Arcane. So if they have an Insidious Chill out, they play Aether Ice Vein, you can pay 2 for both and AB2. 2 just seems to be the most flexible. You can go to 3 Arcane Barrier. You can play the arms as well if you really need it, but I don't find it to be super necessary. And then the last card, we already talked about Zealous Belting, so the last card to talk about here is Staunch Response. This is just because Bravo is so popular right now, and it's really good in the mirror. If you pay the 4 resources for it, so this is a defense reaction, cost 2, but it says as an additional cost to play it, you can pay 4 resources. So it costs 2. You'll have 1 floating if you pitched a blue, so you can pay that plus another blue. So if you pay 2 blues for this, it gets plus 3. So it'll block for 10 if you pitch 2 blues for it. 3 cards for 10 is not bad value. It's 4 value from 1 card and 3 from the other 2. 2 cards, this is still fine because it's 4 value from 1 and 3 from the other. But blocking for 10 is pretty amazing to do with 1 card, because even if they dominate a Crippling Crush for 11, they had to pay 3 cards for it, right? The Crippling Crush and 2 blues. And for your 3 cards, the Staunch and 2 blues, you can block 10 of that 11. So it's just going to deal 1 damage. They've wasted a whole Crippling Crush. You got your Staunch response value. Also pretty good if they attack with Starstruck, obviously, for 10. And it's even not the worst if they do a Spinal Crush. It'll cover all of it. You can just do the 7 side of that too, right? So pretty powerful. Any deck that has big attacks, it's worth it into. If their attacks don't come up for 7, it's obviously not worth it because you could just block with your 3 blocks. But if it's a deck that regularly attacks for at least 7, the Staunch response is worth it. That really rounds out the deck. This is my current deck. I'll have all of these linked below. So my old deck I took to Baltimore, my current deck I'm playing, and then the Pablo Pintor deck that just took down or almost took down a recent event, and then the old version from a battle-hardened Charlotte. So you can kind of see how the deck has advanced over time. I do think he's probably the second best deck right now. He's quite strong. If you look at my tier list on my website, bageltcg.com, I have him as the other S tier hero. Maybe you could argue he's A tier and Lexi is alone in S tier. Some people might say Icelander is also S tier. You can argue it around a little, but he's definitely in the top 3 best heroes right now with Lexi, Bravo, and Icelander probably. They're all quite good. And so he's in the best spot he's maybe ever been. It's a great time to pick him up. He's expensive. We have 680 here, but he's not the most expensive hero by far. I think Icelander and Lexi are maybe both closer to $1,000. He is 680, and there's definitely some cards you can work around it first. So you need the tectonic plating, but that's pretty cheap right now, only $33. The most expensive equipment here you can see is Crown of Providence. It's the only expensive equipment really. Crater Fist is only $8. Tectonic plating is $33. Crown of Providence is $70, but it's a generic you're going to use in a lot of decks. And if you really want to, you can just play any of the one block headpieces. There's a Guardian headpiece that blocks for 1. You can play that over that for now. That card's like 30 cents. I mean, obviously it's worse, but you're only losing 1 health over that, right? Blocking for 1 instead of blocking for 2. And you just lose the effect. But you're not going to lose many games because of that. You can win basically 9 out of 10 of the same games with 1 less health on the headpiece here. And then looking at the actual cards in the deck, Enlightened Strike isn't necessary. You can play 3 blues instead of this. You can see Pablo was not playing Enlightened Strike. He was just playing the 39 blues we talked about. That's kind of something I'm messing around with. So you can save $81 there. Command and Conquer is pretty important, but it's pretty expensive, $264 for the 3 of them. You can replace this with Red Disables if you would like. Red Disable is a pretty big Guardian attack that makes your opponent bottom their arsenal. So it's a pretty nice way to still disrupt your opponent's arsenal. You can also play Pummels. You can see Pablo is still playing 2 of the Pummels. He trimmed 1 of them. I trimmed all 3. But it's another good red card, so you can mess around with Red Disable or Red Pummel. And once again, you are going to lose a few more games maybe because you don't have this card, but you'll still do totally fine. Unfortunately, I do think Starstruck is basically required. This card is so OP in Bravo. It's insane. But it's not crazy expensive. It's $12 a piece for 36. And then you don't need those Warmonger's Diplomacies. You don't even play this card in most matchups. It's usually a blue 3 block. The blue 3 blocks are really, really interchangeable. Like the blue 3 blocks, you can just change them like as you see fit. Like they are not at all any of them required. Some of them are better than others. Like you should probably always have 3 Terrace under, but you know, you're mostly blocking and pitching the blues. So you know, don't spend $41 per. Just play the card I mentioned earlier, the Showtime here, and you'll be totally fine. And then we do have a few expensive like Majestics with Terrace under and Rousey Ancients. These are both pretty required, but they're like $3, $6 a piece, so not crazy. But I'm sure if we make a quick copy of this deck and then we make those subs I was just talking about, we can take a look together at how much cheaper it's going to be. You'll still have an easy way to win almost all of your armories doing that. So we're going to cut that helmet. We're going to add in this Helm of Eisen's Peak, still blocks for 1, so not too big of a discount or a loss there. We're going to cut the 3 Command and Conquerors. We'll add just 3 Pummels because this card's great. Or if you want, you can add 2 Pummels, and we can add that Red Disable because that's a nice red way to disrupt the arsenal. We'll cut those Enlightened Strikes because, once again, that's not really needed. We can add in those Showtimes instead. That's the blue we were on here. And then we need everything else. We can cut those Warmonger Diplomacies here. I know we're on 3 blues now. Or no, we have to switch to a different blue. So let's look at our other blue options. I think most of the time we were running, we can do Buckle. We can do blue Pummels. You can see he was running all 6. So if you really want, you can do 3 more blue Pummels. Imposing Visage is a fine card too. Let's do 2 Imposing Visage. This is a non-attack that lets you find your Showtime. So we'll do 2 Imposing Visage, and we'll do a blue Pummel as our other blues. And that should really be all the expensive cards in the deck. Let's refresh real quick and see how much the deck is now. And I promise you, this deck will win 7 or 8 out of 10 of the same games as the other deck. If you're playing it at the same level, you will win 70 to 80% of the same games with those cuts. And now we are at $140. So pretty budget. Obviously, it's not free still. It's still costing a little, but you'll have most of the Bravo deck. And then you can upgrade from there for a pretty reasonable price. And you will win most of the same games. I promise you. It's not that much weaker. You obviously are losing some power with those expensive cards, but you are not at all butchering the deck. You still get your most powerful cards in terms of attacks, which are Crippling Crush, Starstruck, and Spinal Crush. Those are the 3 best attacks, and you still have those attacks. You're going to be fine. Like, the deck doesn't change too much. So, you know, if you want, I'll include that budget deck that I just kind of threw together in the description, but this deck is great. I think we're coming up on an hour here. This is definitely one of my longest videos, but Bravo is a hero I'm really passionate about. I've been playing at a high level for a long time. I played him at Pro Tour Baltimore. I played Bravo Star of the Show at Pro Tour New Jersey. I've played Bravo at callings. I've played Bravo at basically every level event, and sometimes I don't succeed as much as others based on what the meta is and my performance. But I've always loved him. I have a ton of games. I mean, hundreds of games in Bravo. I know I'm not the only Bravo main in the world, but I'm definitely one that's here to answer any questions you have. If you're interested in getting into the hero, you can leave comments down below. If you want to see the regularly updated Bravo deck list, you can follow me on Patreon, support me there, and I have a bunch of Patreon decks. You can see all of these Patreon decks that get regularly updated, some more than others based on how much I'm playing them. Poor Arachne here hasn't gotten updated since March. He's not very good. But some decks, like my favorites, which are my favorite heroes, are Bravo and Briar, get updated, and sometimes people ask for stuff to be updated. Someone asked for Dromai to get updated, and I updated it with some basic matchups. So you can go over and support me on Patreon there if you'd like to see him regularly updated. But that is Bravo. That is when you should hero ability, what to do with seismic surges, what cards are important, what everything does in the deck. It should be most of your information you need. Obviously, you might have some questions, so feel free to ask them. But after this point, if you've watched this hour-long video, probably on 2x speed, it is time for you to get some games in. That is going to be your best way to do it, whether it's in person with a friend, at an armory, or on Talishar. You just got to get the games in at this point. You have the information. So good luck. Let me know how the deck takes you. I actually really enjoy talking about Bravo. He's my favorite hero. So thank you for spending time here. If you made it to the end, comment Bravo has the nicest chest in all of Wraith. I don't know. Comment something that you made it to the end. He's great. I love Bravo. I appreciate you watching this video. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.